Second.
Any questions, comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to go through the resolutions, which are relatively simple, relatively quickly. The other items are much more important and more significant. Action item B is the resolution authorizing the General Counsel to execute a memorandum of understanding on behalf of the university and the State University and NY Link. This MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding, formalizes and extends the university's ongoing relationship with NY Link to receive critical library services for 20 of the university's colleges and the university's central office. The MOU shall be awarded as an intergovernmental agreement for a term of 1 year. Total amount of services not to exceed $1.6 million for the term. Motion approved. Second?
Second. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any questions? Motion carries. We're moving fast. Action item 1C is the resolution authorizing the university to adopt a revised schedule of tuition charges for students enrolling in the Master of Social Work programs within the university effective spring of the 2011 semester. The proposed tuition increase is $500 per semester for full-time resident students, $50 per credit for part-time resident students, and $35 per credit for full-time and part-time non-resident students. The increased tuition revenue will be used solely to support the MSW programs to strengthen the services to students and academic faculty. I'll move this resolution. Do I have a second?
Second.
Questions? Comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. We now have a resolution to approve the revised tuition and fee schedule effective for spring of 2011. I'll move the resolution, then we'll go for discussion and Q&A. Resolved that effective in spring 2011, the Board of Trustees of the City University of New York adopt a revised schedule of student tuition and fees that includes a 5% increase over current rates for all tuition categories as set forth on the attached schedule. On a per semester basis, these include the following increases: $115 for full-time undergraduate students at the senior colleges, $75 for full-time undergraduate resident students at community colleges, $185 for full-time master's resident students, $165 for full-time doctoral resident students, $255 for full-time law school resident students, and a 5% increase on per credit rates. And be it further resolved that the Board of Trustees authorize the Chancellor to make revisions to the university tuition and fee manual as may be necessary to implement this resolution, and to report such revisions at the first regular meeting of the Board of Trustees following the action. I'll move this resolution. Second? Second. I understand the Chancellor would like to discuss this.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Let me just give some background and set the context for this recommendation. If we go back almost a year to the date, last year when we met with the Fiscal Affairs Committee, we came in with a 2% recommendation for tuition that would become effective July 1st, 2010. You know that it took a while for the budget to be adopted, and as a result of that adoption, the state legislature did not recognize the increases that were recommended by both the SUNY board and the CUNY board, which meant that even if we had collected the 2% increase from the students, this would not have been recognized in our revenue budget, and as a result, we would not have the legal authority to spend the money. So it was the right thing that we decided not to collect the dollars from the students, because if we weren't going to spend the money, then why ask the students for the money? We knew, however, that if things progressed as badly as they had at the time, and things have worsened since the action that we took a year ago, that we would probably come in and recommend a tuition increase for the spring. And that's basically the first part of what it is that I want to talk about. If you had to annualize that 4% increase that would have been effective July 1st, 2010, that we would need a 4% increase to cover the 2% increases in both the fall and the spring semester. But things have gotten progressively worse. We have, and let me just now set the overall context, we have in the past 2 years experienced well over a $200 million reduction in our operating budget. I was on a conference call just a few weeks ago where we were told that we will be experiencing yet another decrease, and there is near certainty that when the budget is proposed by the current administration and adopted by the incoming administration, there will be a huge hole on top of the dollars that has already been extracted. We have a sense of order of magnitude at this particular point in time. I addressed the Council of Presidents this morning on what that order of magnitude is. We're talking about a 9-digit decrease on top of the $200+ million that has already occurred. If we do nothing, we're going to be faced with two things. One is I can't guarantee that we would not have layoffs as a result of not having the tuition increase in the spring. And I want to avoid layoffs at all costs. Second, if we did nothing, we would have a huge increase that the students would have to face starting July 1st of this year. And consistent with the university's compact of developing a rational approach to levying tuition and embedding into the operating needs of the university, which are all of the efficiencies and productivity actions that we continue to take, managing our enrollment in a way to grow revenue but not impact negatively on the academic life of the institution, embed philanthropy now into the needs of the university. And I just want to remind you that merely 10 years ago we were raising under $40 million a year. We're now around $200 million a year. That sounds impressive. It is still low. We're going to have to do better. We're managing our investment portfolio in ways that we've never managed it before, with having the very good work of Janet Crowan. So the university is doing everything that it can to not only generate revenue, but also to manage that revenue well. So what we are proposing today, getting back to the action that you're about to further discuss, this Resolution D about approving a revised tuition schedule, we believe it is appropriate to get back to a rational basis for generating tuition revenue by not hitting the students with veracity, which we will have to hit the students if we do nothing this spring, spread out the impact of a tuition increase over 2 academic years rather than pushing it all in one academic year. At the same time, we will be reporting to the board in November for an expenditure reduction plan that we have been working on. All of you may recall that we formed 3 working groups about 2.5 years ago, with Matt Sapienza carrying the charge on the operating side, Iris Wanshall looking at our physical assets and seeing how they can be monetized to create revenue that can be reprogrammed into our operating budget, and Rick Schaefer looking at all of the operating documents that we operate on at the university to see how we might be able to manage the affairs of the university if indeed the numbers get even worse than they are now, and they are pretty bad. I have been on record, and I want to say it again, Mr. Chairman, in front of this group, that I am unalterably opposed to retrenchment. We have experienced how retrenchment can have a very chilling effect on the university. It is a good management tool if done appropriately, but at the end of the day, however you manage retrenchment, you go after the newest hires, and we have worked so effectively in this university in managing our faculty hiring, and we've brought in some extraordinary, hundreds and hundreds of extraordinary young new people to the university, women and men, that are going to be the future of this university, and we want to make sure that all of that good work is not undermined by an easy approach of basically letting go the last hired is the first to leave, and I just don't think it is an appropriate way to go. So in addition to the tuition increase that we would like to have in the spring, we will have this plan about expenditure reductions. Hopefully, it will cover us. We are still in a speculative state with respect to how deep the recommendations are going to be. It's a little more problematic this year because an administration that is in place now is putting the budget together. We have a new administration that we will know about tomorrow. It's clear that that new administration probably is in very close contact with the current administration, so the information that we have is, while it's somewhat opaque, it is still shedding some light on orders of magnitude. But the way that we have progressed in the past, which I think is the best way to proceed, is to give the Chancellor the authority, once the terrain is much more clearly understood, to be able to make recommendations above the 5% that would be effective starting in the summer of 2011. And that's basically what it is that you are asked to deliberate. I think it is a prudent approach. It is student-centered in that we're spreading the pain of a tuition increase over 2 years as opposed to taking it all next year. We are very mindful of the tuition assistance program cap, which is $5,000. We'll be approaching that cap very, very soon. And our strategy, while the CUNY Compact is going to be the investment vehicle that we will be promoting and working with the new administration, we are going to work very hard to get the TAP schedule adjusted in a way that positively correlates with any tuition increases. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be critically important to be protective of the students. The students are going to be protected because Pell has increased quite substantially, and there's a lot of room when you add the Pell program with the TAP program. They're additive. So the most needy students today would have over $10,000 to cover tuition and also be covered by Pell, because Pell goes up to about $5,500. The total on cap, notwithstanding a tuition increase, is about $4,600. With a tuition increase, it'll give the students that are most needy an opportunity to have coverage, but there are other students that we need to worry about, and we're going to try to devise an algorithm that we can talk to the legislature about that will move the tap ceiling consistent with the changes in tuition at both SUNY and CUNY. And that's where we are, Mr. Chairman, and I or Mark Shaw, Alan, Matt Sapienza can answer any questions or attempt to answer any questions that you may have.
Professor Martel?
If this increase is approved for the spring semester, will that in any way impact the revenue targets for the senior colleges this spring?
That is a great question, Terry. We're not sure. I'd like to believe that after an election has taken place, that the legislature, as in the past, has been supportive of a reasonable program in tuition at both SUNY and CUNY. So I can't tell you with certainty that the revenue will be recognized, but I think once an election takes place, the likelihood is that it probably will be.
Yes, Kevin. And I'd like to welcome Kevin McKesson, new student representative to the committee.
Thank you. With the TAP, the amount of money that students receive from TAP going down $75 in the spring semester, do you think this would be the wisest time to start with the increase?
They still would be covered by TAP. Even with the it has no impact on that at all. They're still covered.
I know, well, at my school in particular, and I know other schools, a lot of students, the payments, as what you were saying before, the payments don't come in a timely basis, and sometimes the classes are getting dropped, and they don't have enough even to afford the tuition as it is right now.
The Pell, I think, becomes available almost immediately, so that should not be a problem.
Any further questions? Comments? I just want to state it so much reminds me of the late 1970s when then Governor Carey talked about the days of wine and roses are over. I mean, the state is, we'll find out tomorrow who the new governor is. I think we can all predict who the new governor is. The thing that concerns me is the last time we had a gubernatorial election, there was an enormous amount of discussion about the importance of higher public education and how important it was to the state, both downstate and upstate. And it's not part of the agenda this time. No one's talking about how important it is, and that concerns me. So what we're about to embark on is going to be a difficult time for all of us. And we shall see.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, and I'm astounded that we're not seeing this as part of the platforms of the people seeking higher office. But at the end of the day, this university and the other universities in the state of New York are critical to the viability, the vibrancy, the attractiveness of this state to bring new businesses here to the state. If you cannot count on an educated workforce, if I were a business thinking about where to site a place to grow a business, especially if it's a technical area, I would stay away from a place like New York State. It first has very high taxes, and if you cannot depend on an educated workforce to be available to man all of the essential jobs, that to me is something that, and I agree with you, so I'm astounded by it. But
I am too.
we know the presumptive governor well. We've worked with him before. We know the family well. I think I would say that they deeply appreciate and value CUNY, and hopefully it's not an oversight, and we'll get that message very well embedded into their behavior.
I intend to support this resolution but it is my hope that if it is approved, that the monies actually get down to the senior colleges. We are seeing cuts, at least at my school, Baruch, that, my opinion, calls into question our ability to offer what we all want to offer, an internationally competitive education. And that takes resources. I'm hopeful that if this is approved by this committee and the board, that ultimately some of this will flow down to the operating units where it is desperately needed.
And we would not be making the recommendation if we did not believe that would be the case.
Yes,
If
Professor
I
Cooper.
may, when you proposed this to the University Faculty Senate, maybe a year or so ago, you talked about a process by which those students who could not afford any of this would be covered by CUNY. Is that what you mean by an algorithm?
Yes, what we have to do, if we're going to pierce the ceiling, if CUNY and SUNY pierce the $5,000 limitation now for TAP, Tuition Assistance Program, we have to ensure that the students who are the most in need are protected. And the only way that we could truly guarantee that is if this cap moves in tandem. You know, I use the word indexing, but indexing has, it just results in negative reactions from people. So we now talk about positively correlate the movement of, you do whatever language you need.
He's a mathematician, you realize.
So we positively correlate the change in, we don't want to negatively correlate it. We positively correlate the change in the TAP ceiling with the change in tuition. So, and one of the easiest ways to do that, of course, is just whatever the increment is as you exceed the TAP ceiling, you just add that to the TAP ceiling, but there are lots of other ways that you could.
But this is not going to.
And we're not yet.
This is
We're not there
going to
yet.
pierce the
We're
ceiling.
not there yet. We're not there yet. So the students that are most in need with this tuition proposal are still going to be covered by TAP.
A question. I was asked by a student, for international students, explain to me the impact of, or I guess they're treated as out-of-state.
They are.
Could you just explain to me impact or what goes on with them?
International students are not eligible for TAP or Pell. That's just the law. We have tried to get our tuition schedule to be more friendly to the students, and we have raised a lot of money in this university, and some of that money, which is philanthropic dollars that are now embedded into our operating budget, a good part of that money goes for student financial aid. And many of those students are students that cannot avail themselves of TAP and Pell.
But their
Not enough.
Right, but their tuition goes up.
5%.
Yes.
5%.
Across the board.
Right, as a non-resident. No questions, no comments? Motion's on the table, and a second, and all in favor? Say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Any abstain? Motion carries. The next item of business is a consideration, as you would imagine, following that discussion, of the 2011-2012 operating budget request. I'll move move that resolution, and then we'll have a presentation by Associate Vice Chancellor Sapienza, and then ask questions and have questions and answers. Resolved. Subject to the availability of resources, the university seeks a total of $2.76 billion for the university. This total includes additional funding of $95.2 million for baseline needs and $63.1 million for programmatic increases. At the senior colleges, the total request is $2.014 billion, a $113.3 million increase over the 2010-2011 adjusted level. Of this amount, $78.2 million is for baseline needs, $35.1 million is for programmatic increases. At the community colleges, the overall request is $746 million, a $45 million increase over the 2010-2011 adjusted level. Of this amount, $17 million is for baseline needs, and $28 million is for programmatic increases. This request includes a 2% increase in all tuition rates to fund programmatic needs. The university's current fiscal year 2010-2011 appropriation levels of $1.86 billion for the senior colleges and $689.3 million for the community colleges, and allocation of various units of the university thereof reflect, per the authority vested in the Chancellery by the Board of Trustees, all budget adjustments reflected in the 2010-2011 state enacted appropriation for the university. I will move this resolution and need a second.
So moved.
Okay, we'll have a discussion. Matt, I think you have a presentation.
Yes, thanks, Chair Loda. There are two documents in front of you, part of your package that I want to make reference to. One is the budget request book that provides a lot of details to our requested amounts, both mandatory and programmatic initiatives. But what I'm going to go through this evening is the presentation that you have in front of you as well, which summarizes the request. So we go to page 2 of the presentation. And here we talk a little bit about what the Chancellor touched on, which is the current economic outlook that we have at both the state and city levels. The state is looking at a deficit for fiscal year 12 of about $8 billion, and we talked a little bit about this at our meeting on August 30th. And the city's gap is a little over $3 billion in 2012. Things certainly don't look like they're getting any better in the out years. The state's deficit grows to about $12 billion in 2013. So there are big challenges ahead for both the state and the city. And certainly on the city side, the actions that the state will take next year will have a big impact on how much of the gap the city is going to have to close. The Chancellor mentioned over the last 3 fiscal years, we've sustained $205 million in cuts from the state. The city has issued mid-year reductions this year for the community colleges. The proposed cut was $13 million in 2011, which goes to over $16 million next year. And as the Chancellor mentioned in his remarks, we are anticipating receiving mid-year reductions from the state as well. And as we discussed, we're planning for the 5% tuition increase for the spring to help offset some of these reductions. On slide 3, we start beginning to talk about our request, and the financing vehicle that we're using for the request, as we used for the last 6 years, is the compact. And the compact is our way for having all of the constituents and all of the stakeholders in the university have some skin in the game. The state and the city, the university itself, our alumni through philanthropy, and our students. And on page 4, we have described in more detail on the compact initiative. On the compact, we asked for the state to cover, and the city to cover 100% of all of our mandatory costs, and to cover a portion of our programmatic initiatives, and it's usually around 20%. This year it's a little over 20%, it's about 22% of the programmatic initiatives we're asking the state and city to cover. The rest of the programmatic initiatives will be covered through self-financing initiatives that the university will partake in. That'll come from 4 different sources. One is through increased philanthropy. 2 is through our continuing restructuring efforts to try to be more efficient. The 3rd is through increased revenue from enrollment growth, and the 2012 request assumes a 1% increase in enrollment, and through tuition increases. And the compact has called for annual small incremental increases We're asking for a 2% increase effective this fall as part of the compact, which would increase rates at the senior colleges by $45 a semester and at the community colleges by $30 a semester. On page 5, we have our summary of the request, broken up by our 3 major funding sources: state, city, and tuition. We're asking for $95 million in mandatory costs. Mandatory costs are those cost increases just to keep the university running at its current levels. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those mandatory increases are later in the presentation. And our programmatic request, we're requesting an additional $63 million be added to our budget to cover programmatic needs for fiscal 12 to bring our total budget to $2.76 billion for the university. On slide 6, we have some more detail on those programmatic initiatives. And you see here that the programmatic initiatives total $72 million. And on the previous page, we saw that we were requesting an addition of 63 to our budget for programmatic initiatives. And the difference of $9 million represents those costs that we're going to be covering through our self-financing components, philanthropy, and restructuring. Because we're going to generate that internally at the university, so we're not requesting the state or city to add those funds to our budget. So the total programmatic increase is $72 million, the largest component of which is our flagship environment. These categories are tied to the CUNY master plan, and our largest component of our request historically through the compact has been the addition of full-time faculty. And so we're requesting a total of $28 million in our flagship environment. The next largest group is in student services, about $17 million, $10 million for a decade of science and for our activities and research, and $7 million each in educational technology and facilities improvement, and $3 million in workforce and economic development. On page 7, provide some more narrative to those numbers. For the flagship environment, we are including $28 million for the hiring of 275 additional full-time faculty at our colleges, both senior and community. The university has added a little under 800 new net full-time faculty over the last 3.5 years, but we haven't been able to make progress on the number, the percentage of faculty that's taught by full-time faculty due to our growing enrollment. And so it's very critical, and our top priority is this addition of 275 full-time faculty. We're also requesting $14.9 million for improved student services, which includes academic advisement, career advisement, services for students with disabilities. And I want to add that included in there is the full restoration of the CUNY Leads program, whose funds were eliminated in the fiscal 11 state-adopted budget. And included in the $14.9 million for student services is a $4 million student financial aid initiative. In fiscal year 2010, we had a $10 million student financial aid initiative. This one is a little smaller, $4 million, but it will help students with the cost of textbooks, as well as providing job opportunities through a work-study program. $7 million for upgrading facilities so that we keep up with our maintenance and repair, and this will help offset some of the need to do capital improvements if we continue to make those maintenance and repairs to our current facilities, and $7 million for enhancements in educational technology. Okay, page 8 again is a summary of the programmatic increases, but since we've talked about those, let me jump to page 9, which is our mandatory increases, which is the largest component of our request. It's about 57% of our total request is for mandatory needs. And the largest single component, as it has been for the last several years, is fringe benefits. We're requesting an additional $50 million from the state for fringe benefit needs at the senior colleges, $10 million from the city at the community colleges. And fringe benefits is one of those areas that throughout government has just been exploding over the last several years. On the state side, the fiscal 11 executive budget the fringe benefits rate was growing at 13 percentage points higher than the increases in salaries. And on the city side, it's been similar growth over the last decade. The fringe benefits in the city's budget have been growing about 13 to 14% per year. And at CUNY, we've experienced the same thing in terms of increases per year. It's been well over 10% per year for the last several years. Energy costs, we are anticipating additional $5 million for heating the buildings, for electricity costs, water. Community college need is higher than our senior college need, which is a little different than it has been in past years. We have had some surpluses in our senior college budget for energy the last couple of years, and actually helped us in this year's budget because we were able to use some of those accruals to offset some of the cuts. Building rentals, we always need new facilities, especially for our Manhattan schools because of the limited space capacity at those schools, and so we do have some additional rental needs. New buildings needs, this $10 million, almost $11 million represents 2 campuses. New buildings will be coming online in fiscal year 12. John Jay College, they'll have a new academic building that's coming online. That is a tremendous building. It's covering 1 city block, essentially. And at Hunter College, we have a new building coming on board for our School of Social Work and for our School of Public Health. And this $10.9 million represents the operating cost of running those buildings, the staff that's needed to maintain the buildings, the security, the OTPS costs that we'll need to buy the supplies to run the buildings. That's what that $11 million represents. And then the last item, our salary increments, OTPS inflation. This just represents the additional cost of doing business, contractual increases for our staff from collective bargaining agreements, and inflation for the items that we purchase through our OTPS budget. So a total of $95 million for mandatory needs. On page 10, we detail the funding sources to cover our budget request. So we have a total of $167 million for both our mandatory needs and our programmatic initiatives. And as stated earlier, we're asking for the state and city to pick up 100% of our mandatory needs and to pick up a portion of our programmatic initiatives. Now, I want to point your attention to, on the programmatic initiatives row, for the senior colleges, the $11 million that we're asking for. This represents the additional 10% that the state committed to when we raised tuition in the fall of 2009. In the fall of 2009, the state hit CUNY and SUNY with a state aid reduction and required SUNY and CUNY to increase tuition to cover that reduction. And the state did something that it's never done before when that was enacted, and that was they told SUNY and CUNY that they can keep a portion of that tuition increase for programmatic initiatives. And so in fiscal 10, we got to keep 20% of that increase, and that is to grow 10% each year until fiscal 13, when we get to keep 50% of the increase. And so what we're asking the state to do is to keep their commitment from the fall of 2009 tuition increase and to make available the $11 million to us. We're not asking them for any additional money for the programmatic initiatives for the senior colleges, just to keep that commitment. The community college state base aid increase of $24 million, we're asking the state to restore the base aid reduction that was made effective in fiscal year 11. It was $285 per FTE in community college base aid, which resulted in a loss of about $20 million to our community colleges. The state legislature actually restored that cut in their budget agreement, but when the governor went in and did his line item vetoes, unfortunately that funding was lost. And so we're asking the legislature and the governor to restore those funds, which would total about $24 million. The 2% tuition increase would generate about an additional $16 million at the senior colleges and $5 million at the community colleges, for a total of $21 million. The 1% that we're assuming in enrollment growth would generate about $10.6 million. And our restructuring and our philanthropy, $5 million in additional efficiencies through our college and central office budgets, and $4 million from additional fundraising through private sources. So that's the funding sources that would pay for our total request. And on page 11, you could see the percentage of each of those items. And so those first two items, public support for both mandatory needs and programmatic needs, will cover about 75% of the overall 2012 request. 25% of it would come from the four self-financing components: tuition, enrollment, philanthropy, and restructuring. The remaining charts that are in this presentation are to provide a context of the needs that we have for fiscal year 12 and to give a little bit more context on the tuition. So on slide 12, you see the headcount enrollment growth over the last decade, and you can see we've grown from 193,000 students in 2001 to 262,000 in 2011, an increase of 35% in enrollment over the past decade, I should say. And the FTE is the same thing, increased from 137,000 full-time equivalent students to 193,000. It's an increase of over 40%. The last two charts are there to show what our tuition will be with the new 2% increase. And so on slide 14, we see the senior college increase for full-time resident undergraduate students. Currently at CUNY, it's $4,600. With the 5% increase proposed for the spring, that would reach $4,830 per year. And with the 2% that we're proposing as part of the budget request, that would go up to $4,925. And as the Chancellor stated earlier, that would not pierce the TAP ceiling. And you can see where we are against our competitors in the New York City metropolitan area. We're still way below our competitors for the private universities, and we're still below SUNY's rate for full-time undergraduate students. On the community colleges, on slide 15, the current rate for CUNY is $3,150. That would grow by the 5% that we're proposing for the spring, and then the 2% for the fall, and you can see those numbers there. We're much closer to our competitors on the community colleges than we have been historically. We're still below those competitors, though, that are closest to us, Nassau Community College, Westchester Community College. But again, community colleges have historically been closer in terms of the local community colleges in the New York metropolitan area. So I'm happy to take any questions now or comments. I do want to, just before I do that, just recognize our Deputy Budget Director, Kathy Abada, and the staff in the University Budget Office for all their great work in crafting the request for fiscal 12.
Thank you, ma'am.
Questions?
Yes,
I had a question posed to me. We used to have child care services, and I believe the majority of that has been eliminated by the state or the city.
We did have a cut this year in the state budget for child care services for $750,000 for funds that we receive through the Office of Children and Family Services. The other funding was in place, but the $750,000 reduction was no question a harmful reduction, and we do want the state to restore those funds as part of fiscal year 12. And so that is included as part of our request.
A restoration of that is included in here, or is requested? We
are requesting it from the state. It's not technically part of the university's request because those funds come through the Office of Children and Family Services budget and not through CUNY's budget. But as part of our lobbying efforts with the state for fiscal year 12, we will make sure that that's one of our priorities to have those funds restored. And that was another item that the legislatures, in their agreement, had partially restored those funds. But again, the final enacted budget, we did lose $750,000 for child care centers.
I just think it's important that we make our constituents know that those monies came from another source and they were cut by that other source. And so, just as a communication issue, because it was portrayed to me that we cut it, so.
No.
And then I had a question on page 9, and you mentioned the schools that the new building needs. I assume the new building at Medgar Evers is already in the budget already?
Yes, that was part of this year's budget. The building did open this year, and those funds were provided to the college to cover the operating costs of the new building.
And what's the status of Bronx Community College's new building? I thought they were coming online soon.
No, Bronx Community College is getting a new building through their there was a high school that was on the campus that this year is no longer there. There is some work that has to be done to that building, but it's not scheduled to open in fiscal year 12. In fiscal year 13, next year in our request, we likely will have a request in to cover the operating costs of that building.
And one last one. I know last year we talked about enrollment management and reaching our cap. But I now see we're growing by 1%. Where do we stand in terms of what our maximum capacity is and reaching that? And I know some schools are already there. This doesn't assume.
We have a number of schools that have reached capacity. And capacity is a qualitative word, not a quantitative word.
It's like
It's
indexing.
qualitative because, it's about how you want to, what time of the day and what day, you keep the institution available for students and when faculty want to teach. So we're managing this the best that we can, but at some point in time, and it's going to be soon, remember this past spring, we had to create waiting lists. And I envisage we're going to continue to have waiting lists, and I think we're going to have them at the senior colleges as well. So we cannot manage our enrollment absent new facilities without using different modalities of teaching, and there's a very big movement here to do online and hybrid courses, which we're a little behind the curve in doing, but we're accelerating that.
But the bottom line is that this campuses believe that they can handle this 1%. I just remember
Some
a
of the
discussion
campuses-
about
Some
BMCC
campuses,
saying
Some of
that
the campuses.
they couldn't even have time to clean up the
Yeah.
building.
Some of the campuses are really filled. Others still have an opportunity, and that's what we mean by managing. Student wants to go to Campus A is filled.
Okay.
We try to keep them in the university, but attempt to enroll them in a different campus.
Right, that's a 1% average, not 1% of everything.
Thank you.
President Martel?
I think and I've always thought that the compact was a rational plan to try to balance our needs, state resources, and student support. When I look at the pie chart, it looks like we're 75, at least the way it's broken out, 75% approximately will come from the state, and the other 25% will be split between tuition increases and philanthropy and cost absorption on the part of the colleges. If that went through, that would be a brilliant result, My question is, do we realistically expect that our mandatory needs will be met? I understand it's a request, but in a planning sense.
Over the last several years, they've consistently met our mandatory.
Even last year, they met our mandatory needs,
That's
and
correct.
then they
And
cut us
cut us.
back. Is that what you expect to happen this year?
It's very likely.
But at least the tradition established. I'd rather have the mandatory needs met and then cut, although it looks like a shell game at some level. It establishes a tradition that I think is a useful one.
So far, the state has abided by that pledge. And so far, they've abided by the pledge of sharing the revenue through tuition. And that's what this budget is predicated upon, that will continue.
Any questions? There being none, all in favor of the resolution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Aye. 7 opposed? No. Any abstentions? None. Motion carries. The last item of business is the results of our investment portfolio. It may be the bright spot of this meeting. We've had a little over 10% return for the quarter. Janet?
Yes, it will be. As it will also be very brief. I've been asked to keep my statements brief, and we've already gone over the September results a couple of weeks ago, where we showed that the pool was up 5.6%. Since then, our estimates for October bring the pool up another 2.5%. So on a calendar year to date, we're up about 8% at a minimum, which would bring the pool to 155 million. As you know, at the last subcommittee meeting, the committee approved the hiring of a global equity manager, International Value Advisors, at a funding of 10 million, and that effectively took place today. And the decision was not to go through with the non-marketable allocation, but rather to build out our core satellite approach. So our intent is at the next investment committee meeting to come to you with a recommendation on that. So that is my comments.
Thank you, Janet. Are there any questions or comments? We just had the investment committee meeting, just seems like 2 weeks ago. So. Sabina, Larry, Janet, thank you. Tomorrow's election day. Please vote. Thank you. That's right. I got